The most dangerous and toughest drug dealer killed his student, who was like a son to him, and besides, his girlfriend was stolen. After that, he is ready to take revenge on the drug dealer at all costs. And so let's get started. This movie is very interesting. I recommend watching it to the end, so as not to miss anything important. The movie begins with Frank, who runs a community boxing gym. We catch up with him one morning as he heads to a local convenience store owned by his friend, Bernie Pope, located on the ground floor of the boxing center. While Frank is still full of energy, Bernie, on the other hand, is grumpy and rarely leaves his home. Besides running the gym, Frank also trains young boxers, and he is especially close to Manny Parks, his star trainee, who is preparing for his debut in the professional boxing scene. Manny has been pushing hard under Frank's mentorship, and as a war veteran, Frank knows how to guide him both in and out of the ring. One evening, Frank invites Manny over to watch a video of his upcoming opponent to help him get a better understanding of the challenge ahead. Out of the blue, Manny gives Frank a gift, a cell phone, with a heartfelt video message thanking Frank for being like a father figure, especially since Manny lost his own dad. Just as things seem heartwarming, Manny receives a text and has to rush off to meet his boss, Adelo Herrera, to thank him. However, things take a dark turn when Adelo accuses Manny of stealing his money. Despite Manny's attempts to explain, Adelo doesn't believe him and orders his men to attack. Manny, being skilled thanks to Frank's training, holds his own and even takes down one of Adelo's men. But tragically, Manny is stabbed from behind, catching him off guard, and he dies on the spot. The next day, a cop named Millar visits Frank with the devastating news of Manny's death. Manny was so close to going pro, and now he's gone. Heartbroken, Frank attends Manny's funeral, offering condolences to Manny's mother, Rosaria, and comforting his younger sister, Julie. Rosaria begs Frank to find Manny's killer, but Frank insists on leaving it to the police. Later that night, Frank drops by Bernie's store, and the two get into a heated argument. Bernie feels that Frank is meddling too much in his life. Although Frank is only concerned about Bernie's health. Just then, a group of armed men storm the store, attempting a robbery. Frank springs into action, takes down the robbers, and gets Bernie to call the police. Afterward, Frank talks to Millar about Manny's case, but it's still open. Millar mentions they found drugs on Manny, hinting at potential involvement in criminal activities. Frank is shocked and becomes determined to keep drugs out of his gym, warning his students about the consequences of getting caught up in that lifestyle. Suspicious of Manny's friend Toucan, Frank decides to follow him. Frank tracks Toucan to an apartment where he's supposed to pick up some drugs. Caught off guard, Toucan spills the truth. Manny had been dealing drugs for a few months to support his family, but he planned to quit after his first professional fight. Frank, furious and disappointed, feels like he failed to see what was really going on. He forces Toucan to take him to the drug den where Adelo's crew operates. Once there, Frank confronts the gang and destroys their stash, dealing a serious blow to their operation. Adelo's father, Leandro Herrera, a powerful Argentinian diplomat, hears about Frank's actions and orders Adelo to take him out. Meanwhile, Frank is still grieving Manny's death. He watches the video Manny made for him, which brings him to tears. In an attempt to numb his sorrow, Frank heads to Bernie's shop to grab more beer, only to find it closed. As Frank walks away, he's ambushed by Adelo's men. Although Frank struggles in the fight, Bernie shows up just in time, wielding a hockey stick, and together they fend off the attackers. Afterward, Bernie opens up about his past. He had once dreamed of making it big in the National Hockey League, but was forced to quit after an injury. Now, Bernie is living with a terminal liver condition, with only a few months left. Hearing Frank's plan for revenge, Bernie offers to help him. Frank agrees, and the two set out to take down Adelo. The next day, they prepare to track down Adelo, but Bernie's old car breaks down, forcing them to take the bus. When they finally arrive at Adelo's hideout, they find that the crew has already cleared out, leaving no trace behind. Determined, Frank reaches out to a police officer named Carmen to gain access to Manny's belongings, which are being held as evidence by the cops. At first, Carmen wasn't too eager to help, worried that she might lose her job. However, Frank managed to convince her to lend a hand. While going through Manny's phone contacts, Frank found a leader man named Hammer, who had been Manny's drug supplier. Armed with this new information, Frank and Bernie set out to track Hammer down. When they found him, Hammer wasn't cooperative and refused to give up any details about Adelo. Frustrated, Frank decided to take things a step further and began torturing Hammer. While Bernie tried a different approach, flirting with Hammer's girlfriend, who seemed a bit interested. Meanwhile, Adello found out that Frank was still alive and decided to take matters into his own hands by dismantling Hammer's operation, hoping to get answers on Frank's whereabouts. In the middle of all this, Frank stopped by Manny's place to keep a promise he made to Julia, building a secret door in her room so she could have a hidden spot to retreat to. Julia was thrilled about her new secret hideout. Later, Frank met up with Bernie, who had asked Toucan to fix his beat-up car, as it needed a lot of work. They let Toucan handle it and headed back home. But just as they were almost there, a massive explosion destroyed their house. Fortunately, Frank and Bernie survived the blast. Millar later warned them to back off from their fight with Adello and his crew, saying they were too dangerous to confront. After hearing about the explosion, Rosaria offered them a place to stay at her house, letting them crash in Manny's old room. The next day, Frank and Bernie made their way to Adello's place in Malibu. Frank devised a clever trick to get past the security guard, but once inside, Adello spotted him, leading to a fistfight. Frank managed to corner Adello, but a security guard arrived and aimed a gun at Frank. Realizing Frank wasn't someone to mess with, the guard hesitated. Adello took advantage of the moment, hitting Frank and knocking him down. Thankfully, Bernie arrived just in time to save Frank. Together, they pressed Adello for the truth about Manny's death. Though reluctant at first, Adello finally confessed that his father, Leandro, was the mastermind behind it all. After learning this, Frank demanded that Adello arrange a meeting with his father. They were out for revenge and had no plans of stopping. The next day, Frank and Bernie met Leandro at a restaurant, and soon after, Leandro was arrested. Frank returned to Rosaria's house to share the news. Overcome with relief, Rosaria hugged him tightly. That night, Frank and Rosaria had a deep conversation, strengthening their bond. However, their happiness was short-lived. Millar showed up with bad news. Leandro had diplomatic immunity, so he couldn't be arrested without solid evidence. Realizing they needed something concrete to put him behind bars, Frank and Bernie decided to follow him. They tailed Leandro in a taxi to a meat packing plant, which he was using as a front for his drug smuggling operation. After telling the taxi driver to wait, Frank and Bernie snuck into the plant, posing as workers. Inside, they uncovered Leandro's scheme of hiding drugs in meat shipments to be distributed around the city. Just as Frank grabbed a package of tainted meat as evidence, Leandro's men caught them. Frank and Bernie were tied up and thrown into a freezing storage room. Leandro came by to gloat, bragging about his immunity and taunting Frank by revealing he knew about his relationship with Rosaria, even hinting at dark plans for her. After Leandro left, his men kidnapped Rosaria, but Julia managed to stay hidden behind her secret door. Breaking free and taking down Leandro's guards, Frank and Bernie raced to Rosaria's house. Julia filled them in on what had happened, and they quickly tracked down where Rosaria was being held. However, they realized they didn't have enough cash for a taxi, sparking an argument between Frank and Bernie. Luckily, Toucan arrived just in time with Bernie's newly repaired truck. As they headed off to rescue Rosaria, Adello got word that Frank and Bernie had escaped and ordered his men to take them out using a helicopter. Bernie managed to evade the attack by leading them through the wilderness, and Frank took down the helicopter with a grenade. They caught up with Adello and subdued him, only to learn that Rosaria had been moved to Leandro's car. Frank called Leandro and arranged to trade Adello for Rosaria. At the meeting spot, Leandro released Rosaria, and Frank let Adello go. But as Rosaria ran toward Frank, she warned him about a hidden gunman. Quick on the draw, Bernie shot the gunman with an old pistol from his truck, which he had thought didn't even work. Moments later, Leandro's men arrived, and Leandro himself challenged Frank to a fistfight, even provoking him by bringing up Manny. At first, Leandro had the upper hand, but Frank's anger fueled him, and he knocked Leandro out cold. The police arrived just in time to arrest Adello and his gang, but Leandro didn't make it. He was dead. In the end, Frank, Rosaria, and Bernie celebrated their victory. Bernie recovered from a liver transplant, thanks to Leandro's donation, and even ended up with Hammer's girlfriend. This film delves deep into the intertwined themes of loyalty, vengeance, redemption, and the complexity of human relationships. At its core, the story revolves around Frank, a former war veteran and dedicated mentor who runs a community boxing gym. His quiet life takes a dark turn when Manny, his star pupil and someone he regards as a son, is brutally murdered. This act of violence ignites a burning desire in Frank to seek justice, plunging him into the criminal underworld. What begins as an attempt to avenge his student's death spirals into a much more complex battle against corruption, drugs, and the influence of powerful figures. One of the film's strengths lies in its exploration of Frank's emotional and moral journey. As he uncovers the truth behind Manny's murder, Frank faces unexpected betrayals and difficult decisions that challenge his sense of right and wrong. The story also reveals the ripple effects of crime, extending beyond just the victim to affect families, friends, and entire communities.